Hi and welcome back to the channel. I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about something that can affect all the families of Cummins engines from the little B67 or even the smaller 3.8. And by the way, the 3.3, that engine's going to be discontinued and they're going to be going to the 3.8. The 2.8 and 3.8 will be the engines that take care of that uh, lower horsepower end of the mid-range market. So, but anything that has an exhaust gas pressure sensor in it, this applies to. So we're going to be talking tonight about fault codes that tell you that the engine is misfiring, or tell you that it doesn't know why there's multiple misfires. How does the ECM know that their engine is not firing correctly? Let's take a look. The first time I saw misfire codes, in my head I couldn't figure out how the ECM knew the engine was misfiring. I thought perhaps it was the amount of time that it was sensed between each time a tone wheel ring went across the sensor that looks at engine speed. And that's what I thought, but I was wrong. If the engine has an exhaust gas pressure sensor, which anything with EGR does, and even I think there might be some high horsepower engines that have them that may not have the typical EGR on it. But anyway, the way that the ECM knows an engine's misfiring is by what the exhaust gas pressure sensor sends to it in terms of how much pressure increase occurs when the cylinder fires. So the ECM knows when it fires an injector, and it also knows when that exhaust valve is opening, and it expects to see a pulse show up on that exhaust gas pressure sensor. And if you look down at the bottom under circuit description, at the bottom it says the engine control module uses the exhaust gas pressure sensor signal to compare increases to combustion events. A missing pressure increase corresponds to a missing combustion event. And this particular engine with all these faults in it, we turned the key on, didn't have the engine running, and we had the monitor, data logger monitor running, engine off, and we're monitoring exhaust gas pressure. And normally that stays pretty static. Where we live, it's about 29.5 to 30.0 inches of mercury, and it just stays there, doesn't jump around. This one was jumping around 1 to 2 to 3 inches of mercury, so 27 to 31 to 32 and back. And what we think happened was that problem was occurring over the range that sensor sensed as the engine ran. So if it was displaying minus values when a cylinder fired, the ECM would think that the cylinder didn't actually fire. So that sensor drove all these faults. And so you might tend to want to, when you see these, you might tend to want to think, oh, maybe an injector's misfiring, the tip's clogged up, or something like that. But the exhaust gas pressure sensor is what's telling it for these particular faults. So let's take a look at the TSB quickly. So here's a list of faults, and we've got misfire fault codes without any audible misfire or performance loss. They call it a false misfire. And there's a whole list of faults. And the reason there's so many faults is different engine families, like the mid-range versus the heavy duty versus high horsepower, would use different fault numbers for pretty much identifying the same problem, just different numbers. Also, a possible low power derate complaint caused by the fault codes. Why would that happen? Because the exhaust gas pressure sensor, say it started reading 30 inches of mercury low and it just stayed there for 10 seconds. That would throw everything else out of whack, and then the engine would derate itself trying to figure out basically what's going on and get everything back running correctly. And so here it says the root cause is an aftermarket exhaust gas pressure sensor not providing equivalent signal as a genuine Cummins exhaust gas pressure sensor. So, if you want to save money, I understand buying aftermarket parts. One of the things you don't want to buy aftermarket is the exhaust gas pressure sensor. I was told by an engineer that's one of the most powerful sensors on the engine, believe it or not. The next one is the intake manifold pressure temperature sensor after that. So, thanks for joining me on Engine Shop Joe, and we'll see you next time.